On August 3, 2026, the FAA certified Boeing's newest airliner, the 737 MAX 7. The document they amended to approve it was signed in December of 1967. The same certificate stretched across 59 years, covering more than 7,200 jets sold. That single sheet of paper saved Boeing billions in development costs. It built Southwest Airlines' entire business model. It is also the reason MCAS existed, the reason 346 people died, and the reason Boeing burned through more than $20 billion in 20 months. In 2022, Congress passed a law to finally close the loophole. Then, at 2 in the morning, they quietly reopened it, just for Boeing. So why does Boeing keep milking a loophole it clearly cannot escape? Because the cheapest piece of paper in aviation has become the most expensive cage ever built. To understand why a 1967 document controls Boeing's future, you have to go back to the plane it was written for. The original 737 was almost an afterthought. Boeing was late to the short-haul market. Douglas had the DC-9, the British had the BAC-111, so Boeing designed something small, cheap, and deliberately low to the ground. In the 1960s, many airports had no jet bridges and no ground equipment. A plane that sat close to the tarmac could load bags by hand and board passengers with built-in air stairs. So the 737's landing gear was kept short, and its engines slim cigar-shaped turbojets tucked neatly under the wing with room to spare. On December 15, 1967, the FAA issued Type Certificate A16WE, and the little jet entered service. Nobody in that room believed the document would still be the legal foundation of Boeing's best-selling product in the 2020s. It was supposed to certify one small airplane. Instead, it became the single most profitable piece of paper in aerospace. But to understand why Boeing could never let it go, you need to understand the machine that paper unlocked. The mechanism at the center of this entire story is something called the Amended Type Certificate and its twin sister, the Common Type Rating. Here is how it works. When a manufacturer designs a genuinely new aircraft, regulators treat it as a new type. That means a full certification campaign against the latest safety standards, a process that consumes years and billions of dollars. But if the manufacturer can convince regulators that the new plane is merely a derivative, a modification of an existing certified design, it can be approved as an amendment to the old certificate. Large portions of the original design are grandfathered in, judged against the rules of the era they were born in, not the rules of today. What that means in plain language is this: parts of every 737 MAX flying today were never required to meet modern certification standards, because on paper they are the same parts approved in 1967, and the amended certificate unlocks the real prize. If the plane is legally the same type, pilots can carry a common type rating across every generation. A pilot certified on an older 737 can move to a newer one with differences training measured in hours, sometimes completed on a tablet instead of weeks in a multi-million-dollar full-motion simulator. Multiply that across an airline's entire pilot roster and the numbers become enormous. Southwest Airlines built its whole business on this. One fleet, roughly 800 aircraft, all 737s, every pilot qualified on every plane, no retraining bottlenecks, no scheduling chaos. Airlines were not just buying an aircraft from Boeing, they were buying the absence of the retraining tax, and that created an incentive structure with a dark side nobody priced in, because once your customers are addicted to commonality, you can never build them a new airplane again. Boeing kept cashing the check for decades. In the 1980s, the classic generation arrived with fatter, more efficient engines that no longer fit under the low-slung wing, so engineers flattened the bottom of the nacelle into the famous hamster pouch shape and amended the certificate. In the 1990s, the next generation arrived with new wings and a glass cockpit, and the certificate was amended again. Each time, the temptation to start fresh was weighed against the grandfathering discount, and each time, the discount won. Then came December 2010. Airbus launched the A320neo, a re-engined jet promising roughly 15% better fuel burn. Boeing's plan at the time was to finally do it properly, to design a clean sheet replacement for the 737 sometime in the 2010s. Then, in July 2011, American Airlines, a customer that had flown Boeing narrowbodies for decades, announced a massive order split with Airbus. Boeing leadership reportedly made the decision to abandon the clean sheet and re-engine the 737 in a matter of days. The The math behind that panic is the heart of this story. Industry estimates put the MAX development program at roughly $2 to $3 billion. A clean sheet aircraft was estimated at 10 to 20 billion, plus 7 or more years of development. And this is the killer: a brand new type certificate, a new type rating, full simulator training for every customer pilot, the retraining tax due in full for the first time in half a century. So Boeing chose the loophole. Again, they would bolt the new CFM LEAP engines with fans 69 inches across onto an airframe designed for engines barely half that size on landing gear designed for 1965 gravel runways. The engines would not fit under the wing, so engineers mounted them higher and further forward, out ahead of the leading edge. The certificate was amended. The type rating was preserved. Boeing even signed a contract with Southwest that reportedly included a penalty of $1 million per aircraft if simulator training ended up being required. The loophole was not just a strategy anymore, it was a contractual guarantee. And on March 8, 2017, the FAA certified the 737 MAX as legally the same type of airplane approved in 1967. The loophole had worked perfectly. The savings were banked. The orders flooded in. Boeing had pulled off the cheapest new airplane launch in its modern history. That was the easy part, because moving those engines changed something that no paperwork could amend. It changed the physics. Hanging those massive engines up and forward gave the MAX a subtle new personality. In certain high angle of attack conditions, the big nacelles themselves generated lift ahead of the wing, nudging the nose upward, making the plane feel different from the jet pilots had flown for decades. Different handling threatens the common type rating, and the common type rating was the entire business case. So Boeing solved a hardware problem with software. A flight control law called MCAS, the Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System, would quietly push the nose back down so the MAX would feel exactly like the old plane. And because the goal was for pilots to notice no difference at all, MCAS was left out of the flight manuals. Most pilots did not know it existed. In its final form, the system took its cue from a single angle of attack sensor, one vane on the side of the fuselage, with the authority to repeatedly drive the horizontal stabilizer nose down. On October 29, 2018, a faulty sensor on Lion Air Flight 610 activated MCAS shortly after takeoff from Jakarta. The crew fought the nose-down commands more than 20 times before the aircraft hit the Java Sea. 189 people died. Less than 5 months later, on March 10, 2019, Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302 was lost in nearly identical circumstances. 157 more people died, 346 lives, and within days, every 737 MAX on Earth was grounded. The grounding lasted around 20 months. The direct costs to Boeing, compensation to airlines and families, storage, rework, the halted production line, exceeded $20 billion, and analysts placed the full damage far higher once cancelled orders and market share losses were counted. Let that sink in. The loophole existed to avoid spending perhaps $15 billion on a clean sheet jet. The consequences of stretching it one generation too far cost more than the clean sheet jet ever would have. But while the world focused on the crashes, a quieter battle over the loophole itself was unfolding in Washington, and it ended in a way almost nobody predicted. In December 2020, Congress passed the Aircraft Certification, Safety and Accountability Act, aimed squarely at the culture of grandfathering that had produced MCAS. Buried in it was a provision with teeth. After December 27, 2022, the FAA would be barred from certifying any airliner without a modern flight crew alerting system, the centralized EICAS technology that has been standard on virtually every jet designed since the 1980s, every jet except one. The 737's alerting system traces back to the original architecture, precisely because upgrading it would break commonality with the older fleet. Two members of the MAX family, the smaller MAX 7 and the stretched MAX 10, were still not certified as the deadline approached. If the deadline held, they would need redesigned cockpits, which would mean differences from the rest of the fleet, which would threaten the common type rating, which would gut the value of the entire program. Boeing lobbied for months and reportedly threatened to cancel both models entirely, models with more than 1,000 orders attached. And in the early hours of December 20th, 2022, Congressional leaders slipped an amendment into a $1.7 trillion year-end spending bill. The MAX 7 and MAX 10 were exempted from the deadline. The law that was written to close the loophole was amended to protect it, with a condition attached requiring Boeing to retrofit certain safety enhancements across the MAX fleet after the MAX 10 is certified. Congress had looked at the most infamous grandfathering arrangement in aviation history and instead of ending it, extended it, because by 2022, the loophole was too big to fail. Thousands of aircraft, hundreds of thousands of jobs, and the largest exporter in America were all standing on that 1967 certificate. Which brings us back to August 3rd, 2026. When the FAA granted the MAX 7 its amended type certificate 6 days ago, after roughly a decade of delays, flight control software fixes, and a redesigned engine anti-ice system, it was Boeing's first major derivative approval in nearly 10 years. Southwest, the launch customer, has around 30 of them already built and waiting. The MAX 10 is still in the queue, and the certificate they were all amended onto is now 59 years old, older than the FAA's own modern certification rules, older than most of the pilots who will fly the aircraft. Here is the trap in full view. Boeing cannot abandon the certificate because its biggest customers are structurally dependent on the common type rating, and a clean sheet replacement would hand Airbus the market for the 7 to 10 years it would take to build. But every year, Boeing stays. The gap between the 1967 foundation and modern technology grows wider, and the engineering contortions needed to bridge that gap grow riskier and more expensive. The company has spent the last several years talking about a future new mid-size airplane, and every time the conversation quietly dies against the same wall. The loophole is no longer something Boeing uses. It is something Boeing lives inside. The cheapest certification path in aviation history has become a cage with 7,000 orders bolted to the door. So here is the final accounting on Type Certificate A16WE. On one side of the ledger, decades of avoided development costs, the loyalty of the biggest narrow-body customers on Earth, and the most successful airliner program ever amended into existence. On the other side, 346 lives, a 20-month grounding, tens of billions in losses, criminal investigations, and a company still rebuilding its reputation one certification at a time. In aviation, the most expensive thing Boeing ever built was not an airplane, it was a shortcut, because a loophole saves you money right up until the moment it starts charging interest. And Boeing has been paying that interest since 2018. If you want to see what happens when Airbus faces its own version of this exact trap with the A320, the algorithm has already lined up the next one for you.